And get started here, folks. Thank you once again for taking the time to join today's webinar. My name is Sean Liu. I'm a solutions architect with Veeam Software. I've been with Veeam here going on year 9. And joining me on today's webinar is my counterpart at Pure, Kyle Grossmiller. Kyle, would you like to say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Sean. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you're coming from. Thanks a lot again for joining us today. And yeah, I've been with Pure for about almost 4 years now, which, for a relatively new storage kid on the block seems like a long time. But yeah, I focus on our rapid restore solutions as well as FlashStack, which is what we're going to get into a little bit today. But with that, Sean, let me pass it back to you and please kick us off.
All right, thanks and welcome, Kyle. So just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Everyone is on mute, but if you have any questions during the presentation, we have allocated some time after the presentation to go through Q&A. There is a questions box where you can type your questions in, and at the end of the webinar, we will take a few minutes to answer as many questions as we can get to. All right, so to begin, let's just talk about what we're going to be talking about. Right, so the agenda for today's webinar, we'll give you a couple of brief overviews on Veeam and on Pure Storage as a company, and then we'll talk about what FlashStack is and what problems FlashStack can solve for you in your environment. We'll then talk a little bit about how you can get hyper availability for your FlashStack environment through our Veeam and Pure Storage integration. And then we'll also talk about rapid restore capabilities with FlashBlade as an off-array backup target. Okay, and then, like I mentioned before, we've allocated some time for Q&A at the end, so we'll go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and start with the Veeam overview. So for those of you that are not so familiar with Veeam, right, we are headquartered in Bar, Switzerland, and as of today, we have over 300,000 customers worldwide, and that's a big number. But the more impressive number to me is the rate at which we are growing as a company. We're adding over 4,000 new customers every single month, and we have right now protecting over 16.3 million VMs in over 180 different countries. Right? We have coverage over 57% of the Global 2000 and over 74% of Fortune 500 customers. We also have a really great net promoter score of plus 73. Right? This is an industry-leading customer satisfaction score, and the number may not mean much if you're not familiar with the net promoter score in general, but plus 73 is roughly 3 times the industry average for data protection solutions. And as you can see there at the bottom, we also conduct surveys, and we also have third-party companies conduct surveys on our behalf just to gauge the customer satisfaction level from a Veeam perspective. The biggest compliment to us as a company is when our customers feel that they can recommend Veeam to their colleagues and counterparts. So to talk a little bit about the Veeam Hyper Availability Platform, there's a number of different solutions and a number of different features that go into the Hyper Availability Platform as a whole. As you can see there, we started off with protecting virtual machines, right? So we have the capability to back up virtual machines residing in vSphere or Hyper-V, and we have announced the capability for other stacks as well, right? As you can see there on the right, you have the capability to back up physical servers now as well with Windows and Linux agents, Oracle and AIX agents. We also have capabilities in the cloud, whether you're wanting to send data to your local service provider via Veeam Cloud Connect, our own cloud platform there. Those service providers can provide you the ability to have backup as a service or even disaster recovery into your service provider's environment. We also have announced the capability to send backups to your favorite S3 and Azure Blob Storage type targets as well. And that's coming with our new release coming later this year. So Veeam Backup and Replication is our core product. And this is where we're going to be spending most of our time today, because this is the platform where we have integration into FlashStack, and it can provide you some really great capabilities that can help reduce your recovery point objectives and also help reduce your recovery time objectives. Right? So Veeam as a solution provides you with the capability to not only back up your production data, but it gives you the capability to take that production data from your primary data center and send it off to tape, send it off to the cloud, replicate virtual machines to another data center if you wish. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Kyle to give us a brief overview on Pure Storage.
Hey, thanks a lot, Sean. And yeah, so for those who aren't familiar with Pure Storage, is a company we started shipping our products in 2011. We've always been all flash. We've been built to take advantage of all flash from the ground up. And you know, these days, I think it's really important, right, to kind of drive innovation and to put that data to work. And let's be honest, right, it's an entirely new world of data, right? Obviously, because we're all flash, speed is very important, right? Your time to market, your time to get analytical results from queries against your existing data set really matters in driving business insights for your internal customers as well as for your external customers. And what it also comes down to, what we've seen, right, is that, you know, we've been talking about data growth in the data industry, you know, for 2 decades. But data growth now is accelerating in ways that we've really never seen before. And one of the main reasons for this, right, is that whereas in the past, most data has been machine generated, human generated. These days, it's being generated by machines. Fun fact, 90% of the world's data that exists has been created in the last 2 years. And one of the challenges with that, right, is that, you know, data has gravity. Perhaps it's created at the edge of your network by a sensor or something, or in your factory. You might not be able to move it to your central data center due to a lack of available bandwidth, or you know, into the cloud, for instance, to process it real time like you might need. So that's truly why it matters, right? And we need to be able to increasingly be able to analyze that data where it is created. You know, and then on the center option there, right, in terms of insight, with respect to big data, you know, we've spent the past decade centralizing that data and creating these huge data lakes. But these environments were really built around slow batch queries. They're not fast enough to keep up with, you know, modern requirements where, you know, instant real-time results are the norm, right? Like that's what people expect these days. And, you know, lastly, there's really a new world of intelligence that's being born, right? Just like, you know, as I mentioned, humans are no longer creating a lot of that data. People want to be able to truly exist in a hybrid cloud environment in which they can go into and out of the cloud with agility to spin up new workloads, you know, when and where it makes sense. So really that's kind of our key tenets of what we're trying to do here at Pure Storage. Let's see if I can get the slide to advance. Sorry for the delay here. Sean, do you mind advancing the slide one, please?
Sure.
Yeah, sorry, something went haywire. That's what we get for the live presentation. Here we go. And whoops, can you go? I think it might have gotten a little bunched up there. Sorry about that. My network connection may not be all that great. Could you go back 2 slides? Thank you. And I'll go through these relatively quickly, but you know, just to kind of talk about how applications and the data that those applications depend on has evolved over the years. If you think back, you know, I've been in the IT industry since the early 2000s, not to date myself too much, but you know, even back then we had this client server model where you had physical hardware, you had multiple teams that, you know, relied on tight communication in order to get things done and to keep things well-tuned and humming along. With the invention of virtualization, you know, in the early 2000s to 2010 or so, you know, that was great because it allowed you to split up those hardware resources and run a lot more, a lot denser, a lot faster. But really that overall stack didn't change all that much. And now when we look at what's happening today, we have this world of web scale applications. And really what we see from at least a data storage level is, you know, a block store, a file store, as well as an object store. And having the ability to, and the most successful customers, I think Veeam and Pure see together, are ones that are able to run all three in-house, as well as scale them up into the cloud as well, as needed. All right, I'm going to try to move this, advance this. All right, we're working, sweet. So with that, Pure really has, the FlashArray M is still around. We're still selling it, but that is an all SSD drive. The FlashArray X is what our current iteration of our block storage device is, and that uses all-in VME storage for, again, your tier one block storage performance. Things like VMs, things like Oracle databases, SQL databases, those really highly transactional workloads. A little over a year ago, and towards the end of this presentation, we'll talk more about FlashBlade. This is our massively parallel, very dense, very fast, unstructured data device for NFS, S3, SMB kind of unstructured file workloads. And then on the right is what I'll get into next, actually, which is our joint offering with Cisco. This is our FlashStack converged infrastructure solution that, and I'll get into why this is such a compelling offering, especially relative to some of the other entries in the field. And we'll talk about that next. But first, this is kind of our overall summary slide of our company, just to bring home, who is Pure, what do we do? We want you to be able to run your critical apps, those test dev apps, your analytics, as well as your new web scale apps, all within our suite of tools. Of course, being backed up and having that data orchestration controlled with our partner Veeam. And what it comes down to is, we've spent a lot of time and intellectual property investing in our Purity operating system, and that gives you all of those data services, right? Flash management, the ability to do inline deduplication and compression, the ability to protect it on array, and those integration points through our fully open RESTful API with Veeam to be able to automate and push those snapshot and backup jobs wherever it makes sense and whatever your SLAs require within your environment. We also have a lot of orchestration capabilities as well. We want users of both of our technologies to be able to move up the stack and be able to run things through, whatever orchestration tool that they choose over, both of our open APIs. So with that, I might be getting, we'll go into a little bit more detail in terms of what FlashStack is and, why we've seen such great adoption of this converged infrastructure solution in the market. There we go. So what we'll start with, of course, is the compute layer, right? So FlashStack is made up of the three key things in the data center: networking, compute, and of course storage. But to start with the compute area, right? What's neat about FlashStack is that you've got this passive UCS 5108 chassis that you can run B series servers in. Because I say passive because that 5108 chassis is actually controlled by a fabric interconnect model, which actually acts as the brains of that chassis. It enables you to aggregate multiple chassis together across a single control plane, as well as install things like rack servers as well. So for instance, if you had an initiative that required GPU utilization within your environment, that's a way that you can control both the blade as well as rack servers, all from via the same fabric interconnect. And just like Pure and just like Veeam, these are all open API driven. So your data orchestration capabilities here are pretty incredible. That and where we really see customers very happy with this solution is the ability to consolidate multiple workloads onto the same hardware stack. Typically we'll come out with Cisco validated designs for a single solution, but it's very common for customers to take those sizing guidelines and then blend multiple solutions running on the same hardware stack. The last thing I wanted to mention in terms of the compute layer is that Cisco does have the virtual interface cards, which enables you to do things like VNix as well as service HBAs, all from these same UCS servers in a completely stateless way. Moving on to the networking layer. So we obviously have a couple different options here. For some smaller customers, you do have the option to directly connect your storage array into the Fabric interconnects, which works great. It's fully supported. We just see that can sometimes be a limiting factor in larger environments where you might want to chain multiple chassis together attached to the same storage array. So for those type scenarios, if we have customers using Fiber Channel, we have fully redundant MDS switches as well as Nexus switches. And that redundancy, especially at the network layer, is really key to our value proposition because you've got these paired MDS and or Nexus switches that enables you to take one of them offline for a firmware upgrade, or if one of them just happens to experience a hardware failure, you're able to do so transparently with minimal performance impact to your running workloads. Of course, both of these switches, Cisco's obviously pretty well known for their networking. So they have some exceedingly fast protocols available, all the way up to 100 gig on the Nexus switch, and then up to 32 gigs on the Fiber Channel switches as well. And of course, all of the compute as well as storage layers follow closely in terms of these performance characteristics on the back end as well. Talk next about Pure Storage. Obviously, I'm a little biased because I work here, but and similar to the previous two slides on compute and networking, what's great about Pure is that it's also a stateless architecture. You literally cable it once. Our chassis is stateless, so you can do things like controller swaps or hot capacity expansions without taking any downtime whatsoever. The flash array, which is our block storage device, it's the black one with the orange bezel, is a 3U chassis. We basically built that chassis in similar fashion to the UCS 5108 chassis in the sense that our idea is that the components over time just get denser, faster, better. That chassis is just kind of where everything lives, and you're able to non-disruptively upgrade it. And then that's also what you can do, by the way, for the UCS B series servers. As they come out with new generations of those over time, you simply swap them in and out of that chassis and get that added performance in a completely stateless and non-disruptive way. The FlashBlade, which is the 4U system beneath that is our file and object. That is also part of the FlashStack ecosystem, and we've got a few Cisco validated designs around that. What's neat about FlashBlade is that you're able to basically add you add a blade vertically across the front of the bezel there, and you get a steady amount of both compute as well as storage. So this is our scale out NAS device. You can actually daisy chain up to 75 FlashBlades together in a single namespace. So that gets you up to about an 8 petabyte single namespace within that 5 multi-chassis design. So again, it's the elastic fabric on the back is super low latency. We cut out a lot of unnecessary protocols and adapters at that level. So again, very, very dense and very fast. Sorry, I'm just waiting for the slide to advance. There we go. And I just wanted to touch briefly on the Pure Storage Evergreen business model. Oops. See if it'll take me back there. There we go. So what this is, right, this is what I think truly differentiates us from a lot of our competitors in the field. And what that is, I'll run through it quickly, is you basically have an initial CapEx spend to buy our appliance. But after that, it becomes more of a maintenance subscription. So that means that you're going to have a steady maintenance fee, like with any other storage vendor. It never goes up. And as long as you have a current maintenance agreement with us, we're going to give you our latest and greatest controllers for free every 3 years. So basically, just by subscribing to maintenance with us, you get our latest generation hardware at the end of those 3 years. If for some reason you overrun the performance of your controllers or you add some new workloads to it and you need to upgrade before that 3 years, we've still got you covered because you get full trade-in credit for what you've purchased before. So you would just be the delta between those two controller models to upgrade. All of our software is completely included for free. So that we recently came out with a solution called Active Cluster, which is a synchronous replication solution between arrays. At our competitors, that's a several $100,000 license typically. Our customers just get it for free. Of course, you have to buy 2 flash arrays to use it, but you do get that for free. The other thing that's unique, I think, is that we never want customers to rebuy the same gigabyte of storage ever. Instead, so if you've bought 10 terabytes of raw storage and you want to move to 20, you get full trade-in credit for that 10 terabytes of storage that you purchased as well. Of course, we'll charge you for the additional 10 terabytes, and that's kind of where our bet is. That's why I think this business model not only works obviously very well for the customers, but we're also able to survive because our bet is that people's data needs are going to continue to increase over time. Last thing too is love your storage guarantee. What that means is that if our customers bring in our array and don't absolutely love it within the first 30 days, you can return it, no questions asked whatsoever. And so why is this subscription to innovation, so important, right? And just to give you guys a sense, this is basically what a petabyte of storage looks like on Pure, just in the time frame that we have been shipping this block storage device, right? So when we came out with our initial product in 2012, it would have taken about 6 racks using the SSDs sizes that were available at that time. Obviously, SSDs have gotten a lot denser. We've also moved to NVMe drives, but as you can see, and these are non-disruptive upgrades that our customers get, and this consolidation that our customers get. I mean, just think about the storage, the power and cooling savings alone that this density provides, right? It's a really compelling story, and this is why I think this evergreen storage subscription is so important. Because media and hardware is going to continue to change quickly, and our customers are able to take advantage and keep up with that change, again, just by paying their evergreen maintenance subscription. Oops, sorry, Sean, could you advance the slide again?
It looks like it's advanced. It might just take a second to refresh.
Oh, okay, thank you. Oh yeah, there we go. Thank you for that. And for FlashStack, going back to FlashStack, what it really comes down to, right, is this is a truly stateless architecture. You install service profiles on your UCS servers, so everything's defined within the Fabric interconnects, and that enables you to basically, take out a UCS blade server, put in a newer one, perhaps denser, more RAM, better CPU, and be able to bring that thing online very, very easily with that modular stateless architecture. And again, too, because it's open API, you can use tools like the vRealize Automation Suite, Cisco UCS Director to automate setting up things like ESXi hosts. So you literally just kick off a workflow after installing the UCS blade, and it fully provisions and sets up, and actually will provision Pure Storage to it as a boot from SAN volume. In similar fashion, Pure is, again, modular stateless architecture. So you have the ability to do controller upgrades non-disruptively. I should mention that we have 6 nines of uptime that's been measured, and that includes things like generational controller upgrades, such as the FA420 on the left there, all the way up to the X90 R2 on the right. So we've literally had customers go through generational controller upgrades as well as capacity expansions and external shelf adds without taking a single IO dropped during that operation, which is very different if you've been around for a while like me, where you've seen forklift upgrades that can be massively disruptive to your environment. And that scalability, right, is really, really key, because as your business hopefully grows and you add new use cases and such, you can actually start with something like a UCS Mini, where the Fabric interconnects are actually plugged into the back of the 5108 chassis for those smaller deployments. And then you can go to discrete Fabric interconnects that you can fill out additional ports in. and non-disruptively scale your compute as well as your storage. And what's neat about Veeam, of course, is because they're a software-only solution. They seamlessly integrate with this, and they're able to protect, all of the different workloads that you might be throwing at this infrastructure as well. I think that was my last slide, Sean, at least for now. If you're ready to take over and talk about our integration, that's awesome.
Yep. Thank you, Kyle. So let's get into the Veeam integrated features with FlashStack, right? You hear the word availability thrown around when we're talking about Veeam, right? So I get asked the question, what's the difference between data protection and availability, right? The way Veeam sees it, right? It's not about backing up your data, right? It's not about data protection alone, because data protection is great, but what's even better is if you have a unexpected outage and you need to recover your data, and you're able to within minutes and seconds instead of taking hours and days to recover that data, right? That's how we define availability, being able to recover any file, any VM, any data within minutes and seconds instead of hours and days. So let's get into how we do this. Right? We do this by leveraging our relationship with our storage partners like Pure Storage, right? Being able to directly tie in to the flash array and being able to create snapshots. We can retain those snapshots, and we can even perform backups directly off of those snapshots. But it's not just the snapshot capability alone, right? Veeam brings about some intelligence into that process, right? We're able to perform application consistency and even be able to do things like identify the application, manage logs, backup logs for you for applications like SQL and Oracle, right? And then we can send those backups to any target you wish, right? In this case, we're sending those backups directly to a FlashBlade. And we'll get into why we would want to leverage something like FlashBlade for a backup target in a few slides from now. But the essence of what we do here is the reason why we want to land our backups on performance storage as a target is because of what we're able to do with those backups once we land them there. So this is just the first point of integration, the Veeam backup from storage snapshots capability, right? We have agentless application aware backups, right? Completely agentless. This is huge for many of our customers that are transitioning over from legacy solutions because they no longer have to maintain those agents, right? It's not just about installing agents across all of your virtual machines, but what happens when there's an update, right? There's just a lot of maintenance and overhead involved with agents, right? Well, with Veeam, you no longer have to worry about any of that. The completely agentless architecture still gives you application consistency without having to have that extra maintenance overhead. We also are able to leverage direct API integrations, not only into FlashArray, where we can leverage those hardware snapshot capabilities, but we also have direct API integration into the hypervisor as well within vSphere, right? So we can do things like we can leverage change block tracking protocols, we can maintain file consistency, application consistency. All of those capabilities are all built into the Veeam backup and replication solution. So why do we have this integration, right? Like I mentioned before, it's all about availability. It's all about being able to reduce that impact on your environment, being able to help reduce your recovery point and recovery time objectives, right? So vSphere is a great platform for running virtual machines, but it's not without its challenges. As you can see here on the left, a standard virtual machine backup would leverage vSphere snapshots. Right? Now, vSphere snapshots are great while we're performing our backup because they give us that level of consistency. The problem comes when we need to remove that vSphere snapshot. Right? The snapshot deletion may potentially cause high I/O, could possibly cause stun on the application, and could be just in general impactful to your customers. So we overcome this with integration with Pure. What we're able to do is we're still able to get consistency. We're still able to leverage all the goodness that vSphere provides, like change block tracking. But after we briefly create a vSphere snapshot, we're able to create a hardware snapshot. And once that hardware snapshot is created, the vSphere snapshot is immediately deleted. Right? So as you can see here, between the left and the right, the VMware VM snapshot lifetime is significantly reduced, right? Because the duration of the backup, we're actually performing the backup directly off of hardware snapshots and no longer performing the backup directly off of a vSphere snapshot. Application-aware image processing is an important component of what we do when we perform a backup of your mission-critical applications, right? And I like to distinguish the difference between just application consistency and what we're able to offer with application-aware image processing. Application-aware image processing takes it one step beyond just application consistency. What we're able to do is, prior to the virtual machine actually being backed up, we can call VSS, right? For applications like Exchange, SQL, we can make sure that those applications are ready to be backed up, right? All in-flight transactions are committed, everything's written and ready to go, so it's in a consistent format. The second part of application-aware image processing gives you the option to manage logs. We can handle things like log truncation. We can even perform log-level backups as well for applications like SQL and Oracle. So that'll help augment your data protection strategy, right? That's what a lot of SQL DBAs are doing today with native log shipping. Very similar, only you can have Veeam do it automatically. And then we also identify the application for proper restore, right? And this is very important because the difference comes when you need to restore the application, right? And if any of you have ever restored any Windows-based application, for example, take Active Directory, right? That I like to use that example because that's one of the more complicated restore procedures, right? You can't just restore the Active Directory machine, boot it up, and expect it to work perfectly, right? There's actually a proper VSS restore procedure that needs to occur for Active Directory to be recovered gracefully back into your environment, right? The nice thing is, with application identification, Veeam knows that that virtual machine you're recovering is an Active Directory machine. So we automatically perform the proper VSS restore procedure for you. So it is just as simple as recovering the virtual machine and powering it on, because Veeam handles the rest. So not only does this make your life easier, but it also mitigates risk, right? Because it makes things a lot more simplistic. So you don't have to worry about going through that complicated VSS restore procedure, and it leaves room for error. Another point of integration we have with FlashArray is what we call snapshot-only Veeam jobs. And what snapshot-only Veeam jobs is, it's something you can natively do today within FlashArray with protection groups, right? You can create and schedule snapshots to happen automatically. Well, now you can do that via the Veeam console, right? If you're already using the Veeam console to perform backups, why not use it to schedule your snapshots as well? Because now you have full visibility. All of your scheduling is in one location, and we can see what backups you have as well as what available snapshots you have available for recovery, right? So now you can use snapshot-only jobs to help augment your data protection strategy. And what do I mean by that? So let's take this example here, right, where most of the customers I speak to only back up once or twice a day, right? So that's this particular example here. You're backing up at 8 p.m. every single night, right? Well, backing up once a day leaves you 23 hours and 59 minutes where you're vulnerable, right? Where you could potentially lose data. That's your recovery point objective. In this particular example, your recovery point objective is 24 hours if you're using backups only. Right? So we can help augment that recovery point objective by creating snapshot-only jobs. And because the FlashArray is so great at creating snapshots without impacting your environment, we can do these a lot more often, right? So now we can schedule a snapshot to occur hourly, for example, right? So now every single hour in between our backups, we're also creating snapshots. What we have effectively done here is we've effectively reduced the recovery point objective to 1 hour instead of almost 24 hours, right? Because if we need to perform a recovery and we need to grab a file back, we have the capability to do so not only from a backup, but also from a snapshot, right? And that brings me to our third point of integration. This is probably my favorite, right? Because it's all about recovery, being able to recover what you need when you need it as quickly as possible. And we can do this either from a crash consistent snapshot that we scheduled in the Veeam console, a crash consistent snapshot that you scheduled natively in the Flash array, or from a backup, right? All of those capabilities are the same. And as you can see here, directly from a snapshot, you have a number of different restore options, right? You have the ability to not only restore individual virtual machines, but you also have the capability to restore guest files, right? And that could be Windows, Linux, and a number of different file systems that we support. But you also have the capability to perform even more granular restores, right? And if you're using a legacy solution today, you may find that the legacy solution requires you to take an application-specific backup to perform granular application level recoveries like we do here. The difference is we can do this directly from a snapshot or a backup without having to take a special application backup for it. Right? So now you have the capability to perform Exchange item restores, SharePoint item restores, Active Directory restores, SQL and Oracle restores directly from a snapshot. Right? So I can do so very quickly and usually within a couple of minutes. I can do things like granular email restores. Right? So here is what we call our Veeam Explorers for our different applications. Right? And they all look and feel very similar. And if you're a Windows user, they have a very familiar feel. Right? It's a Windows ribbon style menu at the top there. So you can select what level of restore you need, right? If you need to restore a single email, a single object, a single user, a single document, right? You have all of those capabilities directly from the Veeam Explorer without having to restore the entire machine first, right? So that's the big differentiator here. Let's take, for example, with Exchange, right? If you take a, let's say, traditional Exchange type restore, I would actually have to restore the Exchange database first before I can pull something granular like a single email out of that database, right? You don't have to do that with Veeam. You launch this wizard, we can actually mount up the database from the snapshot, and I can pull that single email out of that database within a matter of a couple of minutes, right? So very quick, very easy to perform granular restores. Another really great capability of Veeam is the ability to leverage those snapshots for other things, right? Many customers have dedicated test dev environments where they've invested a lot of money in dedicated hardware and storage. So their SQL developer, right, can go and do what they need to do inside this isolated environment without impacting production, right? The challenge you always run into when you have a dedicated test dev environment is trying to keep test dev environment production-like, right? Test dev always lags behind production, whether it be a day or two or a week, in some case even months, right? So you don't have production-like data to develop against. The nice thing about what we do with Data Labs for Veeam is we can actually power up virtual machines directly off of the snapshot onto an isolated environment, right? So this environment can sit right next to your production environment without causing any IP conflicts or any issues. And within that environment, I can do a number of different things, right? We can use this environment to do things like troubleshooting. We can test workaround patches. You can do service pack installations, right? I can do software development. The nice thing is it's production-like, right? Because I can boot up this data lab environment from a snapshot I took 30 minutes ago. So it is very much a production-like environment that you're developing or testing against. So you can accurately predict how that change is going to work in production, right? So this is another point of helping to mitigate the risk of doing software updates or software upgrades or changes in your environment. All right, so now let's talk about rapid recovery with FlashBlade, and I'll hand it off to Kyle to kick us off. We'll kind of tag team this particular section together.
Sounds great, Sean, and thanks for that overview of the integration. I'm, as you know, like we've seen a lot of great user adoption with that, and it's definitely opened up a few doors for for some customers. So it's great to see the adoption, and looking forward to what we do next with it. But what I wanted to step into here is, we've talked about FlashBlade, which is our scale-out NAS storage device. And why I think we've seen a lot of uptick with customers using it as a FlashBlade rapid restore target is in the backup industry today, right? It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. But that industry, that traditional industry, has two major flaws associated with it. The first is that you've got these purpose-built appliances, right? They're made to do one thing, and they do it pretty well, which is, move data from point A to point B. But that's really all you can do with a lot of these inflexible backup appliances, because they do things like deduplicate, data over multiple disk aggregates. So you can't really do much intelligence or analytics on that data because the performance is so abysmal. Even worse is that when you actually have to restore something, right, which we back stuff up so that if we need to someday restore it, we can. It's bad performance, right? When you're trying to reconstitute that data that has been deduplicated out across all these disk aggregates, that takes a lot of time. So much so that if you were to Google SQL restore data domain, this is probably one of the first blog entries you'll see. This is an independent blog entry. This guy took a 6 terabyte SQL VM on data domain and just kicked off a restore job. And then he quit after 24 hours because it was 2% complete. So that's obviously, when you need it most, that's not the kind of performance that you want to see as you're restoring perhaps a mission critical database or something similar. I'm just waiting for my screen to paint. I apologize. I think my network is here today is not quite up to snuff, obviously. Has it advanced, Sean? Am I just waiting for it to paint?
No,
Thank you. And again, so I won't spend a lot of time on this since we're nearing the end. I've kind of touched on it, but massively fast, massively dense, 10 plus petabytes per rack, multi-protocol FlashBlade, so at things like S3, NFS, object store, all those things, right, are able, all those protocols are able to be supported on this single platform. We also do large block I/O and small block I/O equally well also. And again, once you run out of space or need a little performance, just add a blade. Each blade has a little ARM processor in it, as well as additional storage. So you get that linear scalability. As your storage goes up, you also get additional performance. And why is this important, especially in today's world, right? And the reason is that because so much data today is created by machines, there really is no backup window like a lot of us are probably used to, right? You used to be able to kick off a backup job overnight, but in today's world, all of these operations need to happen anytime around the clock, right? And that's just the nature of today's always-on data center, and restores need to happen at any time. You no longer have the luxury of waiting until midnight on a Sunday, which, don't get me wrong, that's probably better if you can afford it, but a lot of times you don't have that option and you need to restore something immediately. And what it also comes down to as well, right, is in most modern data centers, you've probably got, as Sean mentioned previously, you've probably got some test dev instances. You've probably got fast recovery options. When you start to combine that with, an object store, a container initiative, a data warehouse for your data lake, and back up all of those various silos together, it becomes a convoluted, siloed environment that can be extremely difficult to manage, right? Especially if each of these storage solutions requires its own team or its own solution in order to stand this up. Why I think we've seen such great adoption with FlashBlade is that what that really does is it lets you consolidate down all of those silos, right? So you can have your tier 1 storage on block, and then you can have a solution such as FlashBlade, which is able to host all of those other unstructured data workloads in parallel. And that includes ingesting backup data from Veeam. So you can do all of these other things while at the same time running backup and restore operations through Veeam, as well as some other really exciting stuff that Sean and I are going to talk about here in a couple slides. You know, at a top level, this is what the solution looks like, right? It basically you have your, I mentioned this before, but you've got your hypervisor layer that's running on a FlashArray block storage device, and then Veeam provides that orchestration not only to FlashBlade for your fast on-prem restore repository, but as data ages out, you know, you have the option of moving it to more modern backup areas such as AWS or Google Glacier, things like that, through Veeam's Cloud Connect functionality. Perhaps you've got an older secondary DR site running an older array. You can move that data there, or, you know, everyone's favorite, you can put it on tape and then ship it off to a truck somewhere. So all these options that Veeam, or all of this data orchestration that Veeam enables is critical, right? Because it's flexible, and it enables you to meet whatever SLAs the business imposes on you for a backup solution. Mm-hmm. Just to give one quick example, this is a joint customer that we have. They're a government agency, so unfortunately we can't name them, of course. But if you look at their old architecture on the left, they were an existing FlashArray customer. They were running SQL Server on that FlashArray. It's a highly transactional SQL Server. They were using Avamar, and they had 1.5 racks of data domain that they were backing it up to. They had a new analytics initiative, so they were managing a separate data lake, and basically that data lake was being pulled off of that data domain rack and a half with abysmal performance, and then they were also pulling that off to tape. So, you know, they're having challenges with performance, and then of course they get that dreaded maintenance renewal for the data domain. It would have been $200,000 just in migration costs alone to go from the previous generation data domain to the new one. And worst of all, perhaps, right, is that they were primarily using it just for storage. They were not able to get adequate performance to really analyze it in a productive manner. They made the decision to modernize their infrastructure. They replaced that rack and a half. I think they're up to probably 2 FlashBlades at this point, but when this slide was created, they were able to take out that rack and a half of their previous backup solution, replace it with a 4U FlashBlade appliance, as well as collapse that data lake silo onto FlashBlade as well. And of course, Veeam was providing the orchestration layer for taking those SQL backups to FlashBlade and giving their DBAs that, you know, performant test dev sandbox that they needed. And, you know, being a government agency, of course, they've got a requirement for tape. So Veeam was able to offload those older backup copies to tape as well.
All right. So,
yeah, Sean, do you want to talk about, a little bit more about Data Labs?
Yep. Let me tackle this one on Data Labs, right? Some of you may be wondering, you know, I thought we already talked about Data Labs a few minutes ago, and that would absolutely be the case, right? We talked about being able to leverage your snapshots within Data Labs, right? But we can also perform Veeam Data Labs from our backups as well. So in this particular example, if your backups are residing on FlashBlade, for example, we can actually take those backups and we can boot them up in this completely isolated environment, and we can run through, a number of different checks, right? I'm going the wrong direction here. So we can run through a number of different checks, right? Built on top of Data Labs is the ability to validate your backups, right? So not only can you use this isolated environment for a number of different things, which I'll talk about here in a minute, but you can also use it for recovery verification, right? And that's an important piece, right? Because we conducted a survey of 500 different companies, and we found that only 2% of companies actively test their backups. And there's a number of reasons why people don't actively test their backups, right? One, it would take too much time, right? Too much effort, or too much cost, right? It's just expensive to send someone somewhere to rent some equipment to test these backups that you may have on tape or wherever the backups are stored. And it's just not conducive, Right? So what we can do here is not only can you test your backups, but you can do so more frequently, and you can do so in an automated fashion, leveraging the data labs. You can schedule Sure Backup to run, say, every weekend. Right? So once you've taken that fresh set of backups on Saturday, you can kick off this job. And what it'll do is it'll validate that the virtual machine will not only recover, but it'll boot up in this isolated environment. We can also make sure that applications function like they should. There's some built-in test scripts to check the applications. You can even have Veeam kick off your custom test script to check the application. We'll make sure it pings, it can communicate, and when we're done, it shuts everything off automatically and sends you a full report with an audit trail of our findings. Right? So this is fantastic for those of you that have this as an auditory requirement. So what else can we do with that isolated environment? We kind of touched on this on the snapshot side, but you have those same capabilities on the backup side too, right? So why choose one over the other, right? That's a fair question, right? The thing is, when we're running a data lab off of a snapshot, right, that snapshot resides on your production storage, right? So it will use some of the I/O available on your production storage. Here, if we're running it off a backup that's on something performant like a FlashBlade, right, we're not using I/O from your production array anymore. All of the I/O is coming from our backup file that resides on the FlashBlade itself. So you're still going to get a performant environment for data labs without the impact to your production array. And those capabilities are the same, right? The ability to do troubleshooting, do software development, do any type of sandbox testing that you wish to do, and it's still up to date, just like it would be from a snapshot.
And Sean, just to add to that too, I think what's exciting about that prospect, right, is that traditionally backup data has been kind of dormant, right? And this is a way that you can gain further insights and utilizations out of backup data. You know, that previously you were taking, you know, because it's smart and you have to, but B, you know, now you can actually put that data to work in new ways, right, that previously were unavailable. So I think that's really a key component of what Data Labs brings to the table.
Absolutely, Kyle. We used to call those closet backups, right? You just back it up, you throw it in the closet, and you forget about it, right?
Totally. Set it on a truck somewhere, never to be seen again. So with that too, so just to close, just to kind of give you guys a sense of what sort of performance we're talking about here. This is, you know, I want to be upfront that this is a pristine, you know, lab environment that Sean and I work on. It's got a flash array for the primary storage device, basically as the diagram earlier depicted, and then a FlashBlade. In this case, as an NFS single Veeam backup repository. And so what we did is we took 40 Windows desktops, 100 gigs provisioned. Of that 100 gigs provisioned, about 50 gigs was used. We had our joint integration enabled. And so this was running an initial full backup run. So this was not incremental. There'd been no previous runs. And this took about 40 minutes in total, which, you know, again, this is all flash. So that's pretty fast, right? We had 2 proxy servers. Of course, it doesn't have to be physical. You could use multiple virtual proxies as well. This is just kind of what we had handy. And we had, you know, 20 task seats. So this is truly ingesting all 40 VMs in parallel, which basically allowed us to do 40 backup streams to this FlashBlade, single FlashBlade NFS repository at once, right? We got pretty good compression, obviously. You can see that by the amount of data that was transferred over the wire. And again, this is just crazy concurrency, crazy parallelism, and your backup jobs are going to complete a lot faster. What's crazy though is we then took those 40 VMs, and this is why we call this use case rapid restore, right? Because again, this is great, this is all fine and good, but when it comes down to, oops, I might have advanced it there. Sorry about that. So again, you know, what it comes down to is what happens in an outage, in a disaster, when say you lose those 40 VMs to malware and you have to blow them all away from vCenter. So we took them all away. We kicked off the full VM restore job from Veeam on our FlashBlade backup. we hit about a gigabyte a second of sustained restore bandwidth, and it actually took just about the same amount of time to restore them as it took to back them up, right? So this is why I think this is such a compelling use case for Veeam, FlashBlade, as well as FlashStack, is that, in a disaster, this is the kind of performance I think that, I would want to see to be able to bring IO back online. And what's also cool too is that, of course, with the full VM restore job, or instant VM restore job, Veeam is going to boot up these VMs on FlashBlade. So they're going to be serving IO immediately and then begin to transparently vMotion them from FlashBlade back over to your FlashArray or whatever primary storage device is. Because in an outage, right, minutes matter, minutes of downtime or lost revenue. So the faster you can bring things up, even if they're perhaps in a slightly slower state running on FlashBlade versus FlashArray, all the better.
Absolutely, that's where your investment into technologies like FlashBlade really pay off, right? When you have an outage and that data needs to be recovered as quickly as possible.
Couldn't agree more. I think that concludes the presentation. I did not see any questions in the chat window, unless I'm perhaps missing it. But so if you've got any questions, we got a few minutes. Please feel free to enter them now. Otherwise, your time is much appreciated.
Yes, once again, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you for your time. If you have any questions after the fact, right, you can visit each of our websites at veeam.com or purestorage.com. There's a bunch of collateral that we've done jointly together that can help you guide through deploying a Veeam Rapid Restore with FlashBlade solution, or a Veeam integrated with FlashArray solution, right? And here comes a great question, right? How is Veeam and Pure Storage set up? That's a great question, Ryan. And we actually have a joint integrated deployment guide. So it's essentially on the Veeam side, you can deploy Veeam in a number of different ways, right? It can be a virtual machine. It can be a physical server if you want to remove data protection from the cluster that is protecting, right? And what we can do is we can actually tie directly into the storage fabric. So if your FlashArray is connected to vSphere via Fiber Channel or via iSCSI, we can leverage either or, right? And what Veeam will do is we actually have a plugin you download and you install it on the Veeam GUI. It only takes a couple minutes, and then you can add the FlashArray directly into Veeam via the management IP and credentials. And from there, we'll automatically identify the volumes, we'll automatically identify snapshots, and you'll be able to leverage the integration immediately.
Yep, and just on the FlashBlade side, quickly, we support both SMB as well as NFS-based repositories. Veeam has a concept of a scale-out repository as well. So if, for instance, you wanted to create an NFS scale-out repository that has, multiple data VIPs to FlashBlade to be able to not only gain additional performance, but resiliency, so if one extent goes down, you're not, messed up for some reason, but not that it will, but, there are some strategies in terms of FlashBlade connectivity as well. And we've got a lot of documentation on this and more coming out in the near future that walks you through some best practices and recommendations that we've seen not only in the lab, but also in some customer deployments as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right. Well, that brings us to the top of the hour. Once again, thank you everyone for taking the time to join. I hope this was a real good use of your time. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to point you in the right direction or help you in any way we can.